Hello and welcome to the Larry Brock and Glen Motz Show, formerly known as The Blueprint, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We appreciate you joining us here. We ask that you like, comment, subscribe, share this program. There's information that you're about to hear on bail reform and C-21 that you probably aren't hearing in the mainstream media. We ask that you share that and tell your friends they can download or listen to the program in its entirety on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You name it, it is out there. The two gentlemen sitting next to me here bear no introduction, although they are here quite often. We appreciate it because it's a topic we need to keep talking about, sadly. So we have Larry Brock from Brantford Brant, also Glen Motz from Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner in the beautiful province of Alberta. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on yet again.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Jamie.
And happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Always a pleasure. Happy Valentine's
It's a
Day.
Valentine's Day edition, but I don't think there's much love coming from the Liberals on the topic of bail reform. We have instances where we have people out on bail, violent repeat offenders, committing crimes. Yet again, we're seeing crime rates go up in this country. What is going on? Why is there no action from this government? I know their previous piece of legislation started the ball rolling, C-75, reduced sentences for a series of crimes, and it took a few years to kind of percolate through the system, and now we're dealing with the ramifications of that.
To be extremely blunt with all of our listeners, this was a process that this government has created literally since 2015 to telegraph to criminals from coast to coast to coast that you can continue and to repeat your bad behavior and there will be limited consequences, that we will grant you bail at the very earliest opportunity and on the most least onerous conditions, and that you can continue to repeat that same type of behavior and continue to get bail. And then eventually, when you are about to be sentenced, we have this Liberal government introducing all types of legislation to make it very easy for offenders to get through their sentence without learning anything. And that's one of the biggest frustrating things for me as a former prosecutor, that one of the tenets of sentencing in our courts is the issue regarding deterrence, is learning from your behavior. Anything that this government has done with Bill 75 and now C5 telegraphs the complete opposite. We're making it easy for you to continue to terrorize our communities. That's what's happening.
Now, as a former law enforcement officer, what do you think the morale is in police departments across the country? Because I'm sure you've spoken to colleagues that you used to work with or have within your network.
You're right. They're frustrated just like the communities are frustrated. You know, the public sometimes blames the courts or the police services for the fact that, you know, there's criminals being released from, you know, out again right after an offense is committed. But as Larry's indicated, legislatively now, the police and the Crown, the courts, are required, mandated, to release somebody at the earliest opportunity, apart from detention, again with limited conditions, and so it's having an impact on law enforcement morale, but it's also having an impact on law enforcement responses and calls for service, because, you know, look at the instances we've had. There's a carjacking in Manitoba within the last month, where the accused was released from the Winnipeg Police Service as per the conditions of this legislation in 2018 in C-75, that minutes after his release, he was involved in a violent carjacking, released on bail. You know, we have these, there's been literally hundreds of them across the country in the last month, some of them with the loss of life of the OPP constable in Hamilton, where to a person, every accused was released on bail because that was the mandated requirement of the legislation. And so it's putting our communities at risk. It is putting you know, an undue a toll on our officers who have to respond to these calls that, and in some instances, the paperwork isn't even done yet, and that accused is out on bail, reoffending again. So the old adage that, you know, 80% of the crime is committed by 20% of the criminals is very, very true in this circumstance, because they're not held to account.
So
And Jamie,
Yep,
if I could
absolutely.
add, if I could add to that, I have in the last several weeks have spoken to a number of police associations in my own riding and across this country, and police chiefs, and more to Glen's point. Unfortunately, we are seeing officers really second guessing whether or not this is a career choice for them. It's impacting on recruitment. We are having officers who are actually actively looking for office jobs because at least at that point they can guarantee to their family they're going to return at the end of the day.
Right. And they don't want to take the stress of going through a situation where they might have to arrest a violent repeat offender and see that person walking out the door before the paperwork's dry. That to me would probably put my stress level.
Well, and it does. And Larry and I both have history in the justice system where we remember the day where on the street, if I was to arrest an individual for a crime, and I will talk about violent crime, but for a violent crime, that first arrest, the first instance, the onus is on me as a police department or as a police constable or the Crown prosecutor to show justice why that accused should be detained in custody. That is completely turned around. And also, if that individual is released, they're released on what was called judicial interim release, on conditions. And if they committed another offense while they're out on those conditions, the onus is reversed, not on the Crown any longer, on the police or the courts, but on the accused to show why they should be released from custody on its second offense. That no longer happens. So it's like over and over. We call it the revolving door of justice.
Right.
That's exactly why this is happening the way it's happening. Liberal legislation that is failing public safety, failing Canadians, and I appreciate Larry's comment. The whole process of a justice system is to rehabilitate, but it's also to deter.
Right.
And we have no deterrence any longer.
And to follow up again, excellent points from my colleague. Prior to 2015, when I was in the trenches in bail court probably 3 to 4 days a week, when you had an individual facing a reverse onus situation, so either they've committed offense, which by its very nature creates a reverse onus, or there already had been a release and they breached that particular release by committing further offenses. We felt confident prior to 2015 that a reverse onus was such a steep hill for an individual to establish that there should be another opportunity for them to prove themselves in the community. We found more and more people being detained because of that reverse onus scenario. Post 2015, we had two significant Supreme Court of Canada decisions that came out in 2017 and 2020, Antic and Zora, which completely changed the landscape as far as bail is concerned in our bail courts. Again, with that emphasis on the element of restraint to release at the earliest opportunity with the least onerous conditions, and it did not matter if that person was facing a reverse onus. It did not matter if they had a history, a record of repeated bad behavior, a record of failing to attend court, a record for failing to comply with bail conditions. The message was to the trier, whether that be the justice of the peace or the judge, the Supreme Court of Canada has said this is permissible, so I must follow that directive. That's what was happening. And to make matters worse, again, legislation from the government, 75, and now C5, that has compounded the situation.
What does it say to an individual who may have been a victim of crime to see the person, the alleged person, whether they've been convicted or going through the process, back on the street? Life is tough enough. We're at 40-year highs. Prices are out of control, taxes are going up, and you're being asked to pay more, but your quality of life is going down. What does that say to that individual? What pressure does it put onto that person to say, why isn't my government delivering the most basic services?
The number one responsibility for any democratic government is to keep its citizens safe and to deliver on a basic promise of service. So leaving aside the issue of service, I know your question was too faceted, but insofar as the safety is concerned, this government is telegraphing to the Canadians out there, to victims, to other individuals who may have had a relative victimized by an individual facing a crime, is that their rights don't matter. That there is more of an emphasis on protecting and rehabilitating the offender at the expense of Canadians. And that is where I vehemently oppose the directive of this woke Liberal government.
You know, we have a Victims' Bill of Rights, and it's been largely ignored in this legislation and in the direction the government is going. You know, I was involved in victim services work years back in law enforcement, and you know, even then, before we had this sort of just a complete, you know, dismantling, if you will, of the integrity of the justice system because of this Liberal legislation, victims were already hesitant. Now I know many of them, and my colleagues that I've spoken to, as Larry has. The victims themselves are going like, why did I bother even reporting this? Because you know, it seemed to have no impact. And so that's what's happening. In many cases, I think many victims don't report their crimes, which is unfortunate.
Particularly in the area of sexual assaults. I specialized in those violent prosecutions, and I would inevitably be frustrated as to how difficult it was for me to develop a rapport with victims, knowing full well that it took an incredible amount of courage to actually report it at the first instance, knowing that for every individual who takes that step and has that courage, there's probably 9 others that are saying, you know what, I heard about this person having a bad experience, that person having a bad experience. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to be re-victimized by the process. And that's disheartening for me as a member of the Ontario Bar, that there is such a level of distrust with our judicial institutions. It's heartbreaking.
All provinces, the premiers have signed a letter, the territorial leaders as well, the premiers, asking for bail reform, asking for the government to take a look at this. I know you two have been asking questions. Our friend and colleague Frank Caputo out in Kamloops have been asking questions about it. The Justice Minister, a former law professor, basically brushes off the issue, basically tells us Canadians have never had it so good. They're almost in some disbelief that we're just making up the letters and the emails we're getting from constituents that are either victims of crime or worried about the situation in their communities.
You only have to look at, like I said, the last 6 weeks, for example. If you know, Mr. Lametti wants to stay in the Ottawa bubble, he does it at the demise of Canadians. You know, to re-victimization. We had the Ontario constable killed by an individual who was out on bail. We had random shootings at paramedics in Vancouver from somebody who was out on bail. We had multiple stabbings in Mississauga from someone who was out on bail. We've had, like the carjacking I mentioned in Winnipeg, someone who was out on bail. And those are just a few of thousands across the country. And the fact that they want to ignore this, you know, I hope they do it at their own political peril, to be honest with you. And you know, they're signaling that, well, we're going to listen. But what does that actually mean? To me, listening in government means we're here to serve the people that elected us. And that's all Canadians. And this government, I think, has lost their way with that. They're not the government, you know, of the people. They should be government for the people. And that means that if you've had some legislation that is not being properly administered in the justice system, it's your responsibility to fix it. Because as Larry said earlier, one of the first and greatest responsibilities of any government is to protect its citizenry. In a democracy, when you fail to do that, people start losing trust in their government.
So the justice system, the Liberals have broke the justice system. Their answer, let's go after law-abiding firearms owners. Let's go back to the firearms issue here quickly.
Yes.
We had a very minor victory in terms of some of the amendments.
Right.
taken away. Thankfully, the bill is still pretty horrible. Do you want to do a quick rundown on that?
Well, right now, like today, at 3:30 today, we have the committee has 4 additional meetings as a result of the government pulling their G4, which is a definition of a prohibited firearm, and G46, which codified many of the firearms that have been prohibited, the thousands of firearms that have been prohibited because of the Order in Council since the 90s and the May 20, and now this new definition. So much Canadian people have pushed back against the government. They removed those amendments from the bill, but we are now starting today in our public safety meetings talking about the impacts of that no longer being part of the bill. So I don't know exactly where that'll go, but let's not kid ourselves. This government has been pretty intent on attacking firearms owners because that's the easiest way to give the impression
That's right.
to
False
those who
sense of
don't
security,
know any better that they're
Yeah.
doing something. It will have zero impact. Research is out there. We have a gentleman today, Dr. Langman, who is going to be at committee. He's an independent researcher. He's an emergency room doctor. He says there is no statistical proof anywhere that shows that firearm prohibitions have an impact on public safety.
No.
They don't.
No, the messaging is directed towards their base. It has nothing to do with public safety.
That's
I've
right.
mentioned this
Yep.
numerous times. Criminals will never be deterred by a ban on any weapon because these individuals aren't taking the necessary legal steps to acquire it. They're getting it from all of the illegal smuggling that's happening through our land borders, through our borders at our ports. They're using creative means by drones. They will always find a way to access an illegal gun. And this government is doing nothing to address the real root cause of the increase in gun crime in this community, across this country. Let's be frank.
And it's not law-abiding gun owners.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. If they don't want to protect Canadians, get out of the way and let a conservative government do the job
Hear, hear.
appropriately, efficiently, and fast.
Well, look at all the countries that have put in bans or pieces of legislation that make it near impossible to get a firearm for individual use for hunting and what have you. Like, look at Mexico. Look at Colombia. Like, the criminals aren't listening to these laws. This is the problem. The city of Chicago is a gun-free zone. They have double-digit homicides every single weekend.
Yes.
Like, this is not a law-abiding citizen problem. But you're right. It gives that false sense of security to people who don't know any better. And I bet you a lot of people don't know that in Union Station in downtown Toronto, the heart of the beast, there was an indoor handgun shooting range for upwards of 80 years. I bet you nobody knows that.
I wasn't aware of that.
Absolutely. It closed
Interesting.
recently, but none of those people who went to that range were causing any of the crimes in the streets outside.
Right.
You're right. Thankfully, we're not like the U.S. In how our gun laws are pretty strict already, and people who want the privilege to have a PAL or an RPAL and own a firearm are willing to go through the hoops necessary to have that privilege. I was talking to an individual, just the other day, law enforcement official involved in firearm investigations, who said that, on most streets in Canada and major cities, firearms that you can buy legally for $800 are going in the black market for $8,000. The demand has not gone down.
And what I really fear, Jamie, is we are heading towards a form of vigilante justice, where Canadians are just getting fed up with these thugs ruling our streets, causing terror, causing panic. They recognize the police are doing their job, and the criminal justice system is letting them down, and our federal government is complicit in that. And that's what I really worry about.
Well, that's what I was kind of musing about. One of my first questions about how the average citizen, when they are asked to keep paying more, their service is down. I had a public meeting in my community. The first time it's ever happened, a public meeting on safety. And we live in a rural area. It's usually safe. People hardly lock their doors to their cars or their house. Now they have to. And some people were expressing frustration, like, what do I do Like, no matter, I call the police, they come and arrest the person if they can find them. Go through the sorts, they're out on the street. Like, what can I do? Like, this is the level of frustration. But we have started late. I do apologize. We do have to get out of here. Question period's coming up momentarily. Final thoughts, gentlemen. Do you want to start with Larry?
I'll repeat my mantra. This government has continually failed Canadians. They've done so since 2015. They're putting communities at risk by their woke, soft, on-agenda ideology. This has to stop. We have a groundswelling of support. We're finally having a discussion, your podcast. We've got premiers, we've got police chiefs, we've got police associations. We need those constituents who perhaps hopefully are watching this podcast from Liberal-held ridings to reach out to their MPs to say enough is enough. It is time to stand up for law-abiding Canadians. Keep us safe. If you can't do the job, move over. Let the next Conservative government get that job done.
I agree. Glen?
Well, that's going to be pretty tough to top. I will just say, listen, this Liberal Prime Minister and his Liberal government has broken much of Canada, including our justice system. And as Larry indicated, it's time for them to get out of the way and let a Conservative government fix what they've broken.
Glen Motz, Member of Parliament, Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner. Also, Larry Brock, Member of Parliament for Brantford Brant. We do appreciate your time, gentlemen. We appreciate your time as well on the Larry and Glen Show, formerly known as The Blueprint. If you like what you heard, please comment, subscribe, share this program. Tell your friends they can download it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. As Larry said just a few moments ago, if you know friends, family members in Liberal ridings, tell them about this show. Even take a few seconds to listen to what these two gentlemen have said. This message is very important. We have next week Rachel Harder coming up to talk about internet censorship. Freedom of speech lovers, make sure you tune in next week as well. Until then, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's The Blueprint.